Chapter 19. Behind them, Korak emerged from the jungle and recovered his spear from Numa's side. He still was smiling. He had enjoyed the spectacle exceedingly. There was one thing that troubled him: the agility with which the she had clambered from her pony's back into the safety of the tree above her. That was more like Mangani, more like his lost Miriam. He sighed. His lost Miriam, his little dead Miriam. He wondered if this she-stranger resembled his Miriam in other ways. A great longing to see her overwhelmed him. He looked after the three figures moving steadily across the plain. He wondered where might lie their destination. A desire to follow them came over him, but he only stood there watching until they had disappeared in the distance. The sight of the civilized girl and the dapper, khaki-clad Englishman had aroused in Korak memories long dormant. Once he had dreamed of returning to the world of such as these, but with the death of Miriam, hope and ambition seemed to have deserted him. He cared now only to pass the remainder of his life in solitude, as far from man as possible. With a sigh, he turned slowly back into the jungle. Tantor, nervous by nature, had been far from reassured by close proximity to the three strange whites, and with the report of Hansen's rifle had turned and ambled away at his long, swinging shuffle. He was nowhere in sight when Korak returned to look for him. The ape-man, however, was little concerned by the absence of his friend. Tantor had a habit of wandering off unexpectedly. For a month they might not see one another, for Korak seldom took the trouble to follow the great pachyderm, nor did he upon this occasion. Instead, he found a comfortable perch in a large tree and was soon asleep. At the bungalow, Bwana had met the returning adventurers on the veranda. In a moment of wakefulness he had heard the report of Hansen's rifle far out across the plain and wondered what it might mean. Presently it had occurred to him that the man whom he considered in the light of a guest might have met with an accident on his way back to camp. So he had arisen and gone to his foreman's quarters, where he had learned that Hansen had been there earlier in the evening, but had departed several hours before. Returning from the foreman's quarters, Bwana had noticed that the corral gate was open, and further investigation revealed the fact that Miriam's pony was gone, and also the one most often used by Baines. Instantly, Bwana assumed that the shot had been fired by Honorable Morrison, and had again aroused his foreman, and was making preparations to set forth in investigation when he had seen the party approaching across the plain. Explanation on the part of the Englishman met a rather chilly reception from his host. Miriam was silent. She saw that Bwana was angry with her. It was the first time, and she was heartbroken. "Go to your room, Miriam," he said, "and Baines, if you will step into my study, I'd like to have a word with you in a moment." He stepped toward Hansen as the others turned to obey him. There was something about Bwana, even in his gentlest moods, that commanded instant obedience. "How did you happen to be with them, Hansen?" he asked. "I'd been sitting in the garden," replied the trader, after leaving Jervis's quarters. "I have a habit of doing that, as your lady probably knows. Tonight I fell asleep behind a bush, and was awakened by them two spooning. I couldn't hear what they said, but presently Baines brings two ponies, and they ride off. I didn't like to interfere, for it wasn't any of my business, but I knew they hadn't ought to be ridin' about that time of night, leastways not the girl. It wasn't right, and it wasn't safe, so I follows them, and it's just as well I did. Baines was getting away from the lion as fast as he could, leavin' the girl to take care of herself, when I got a lucky shot into the beast's shoulder that fixed him." Hansen paused. Both men were silent for a time. Presently the trader coughed in an embarrassed manner, as though there was something on his mind he felt in duty bound to say, but hated to. "What is it, Hansen?" asked Bwana. "You were about to say something, weren't you?" "Well, you see it's like this," ventured Hansen. "Being around here evenings a good deal. I've seen them two together a lot, and, begin your pardon, sir, but I don't think Mr. Baines means the girl any good. I've overheard enough to make me think he's trying to get her to run off with him." Hansen, to fit his own ends, hit nearer the truth than he knew. He was afraid that Baines would interfere with his own plans, and he had hit upon a scheme to both utilize the young Englishman and get rid of him at the same time. "And I thought," continued the trader, "that inasmuch as I'm about due to move, you might like to suggest to Mr. Baines that he go with me. I'd be willin' to take him north to the caravan trails as a favor to you, sir." Bwana stood in deep thought for a moment. Presently he looked up. "Of course, Hanson, Mr. Baines is my guest," he said, a grim twinkle in his eye. "Really, I cannot accuse him of planning to run away with Miriam on the evidence that we have, and as he is my guest, I should hate to be so discourteous as to ask him to leave. But, if I recall his words correctly, it seems to me that he has spoken of returning home, and I am sure that nothing would delight him more than going north with you. You say you start tomorrow? I think Mr. Baines will accompany you. Drop over in the morning if you please, and now good night, and thank you for keeping a watchful eye on Miriam." Hanson hid a grin as he turned and sought his saddle. Bwana stepped from the veranda to his study, where he found the Honorable Morrison pacing back and forth, evidently very ill at ease. "Baines," said Bwana, coming directly to the point, "Hanson is leaving for the north tomorrow. He has taken a great fancy to you, and just asked me to say to you that he'd be glad to have you accompany him. Good night, Baines." At Bwana's suggestion, Miriam kept to her room the following morning until after the Honorable Morrison Baines had departed. Hanson had come for him early. In fact, he had remained all night with the foreman, Jervis, that they might get an early start. The farewell exchanges between the Honorable Morrison and his host were of the most formal type, and when at last the guest rode away, Bwana breathed a sigh of relief. It had been an unpleasant duty, and he was glad that it was over. But he did not regret his action. He had not been blind to Baines's infatuation for Miriam, and knowing the young man's pride in caste, he had never for a moment believed that his guest would offer his name to this nameless Arab girl, for, extremely light in color though she was for a full-blood Arab, Bwana believed her to be such. He did not mention the subject again to Miriam, and in this he made a mistake, for the young girl, while realizing the debt of gratitude she owed Bwana and "my dear," was both proud and sensitive, so that Bwana's action in sending Baines away and giving her no opportunity to explain or defend hurt and mortified her. Also, it did much toward making a martyr of Baines in her eyes and arousing in her breast a keen feeling of loyalty toward him. What she had half mistaken for love before, she now wholly mistook for love. Bwana and "my dear" might have told her much of the social barriers that they only too well knew Baines must feel existed between Miriam and himself, but they hesitated to wound her. It would have been better had they inflicted this lesser sorrow and saved the child the misery that was to follow because of her ignorance. As Hanson and Baines rode toward the former's camp, the Englishman maintained a morose silence. The other was attempting to formulate an opening that would lead naturally to the proposition he had in mind. He rode a neck behind his companion, grinning as he noted the sullen scowl upon the other's patrician face. "Rather rough on you, wasn't he?" he ventured at last, jerking his head back in the direction of the bungalow as Baines turned his eyes upon him at the remark. "He thinks a lot of the girl," continued Hanson, "and don't want nobody to marry her and take her away, but it looks to me as though he was doing her more harm than good in sending you away. She ought to marry some time, and she couldn't do better than a fine young gentleman like you." Baines, who had at first felt inclined to take offense at the mention of his private affairs by this common fellow, was mollified by Hanson's final remark, and immediately commenced to see in him a man of fine discrimination. "He's a darned bounder," grumbled the Honorable Morrison, "but I'll get even with him. He may be the whole thing in Central Africa, but I'm as big as he is in London, and he'll find it out when he comes home." "If I was you," said Hanson, "I wouldn't let any man keep me from getting the girl I want. Between you and me, I ain't got no use for him either, and if I can help you any way, just call on me." "It's mighty good of you, Hanson," replied Baines, warming up a bit, "but what can a fellow do here in this God-forsaken hole?" "I know what I'd do," said Hanson. "I'd take the girl along with me. If she loves you, she'll go, all right." "It can't be done," said Baines. "He bosses this whole blooming country for miles around. He'd be sure to catch us." "No, he wouldn't, not with me running things," said Hansen. "I've been trading and hunting here for 10 years, and I know as much about the country as he does. If you want to take the girl along, I'll help you, and I'll guarantee that there won't nobody catch up with us before we reach the coast. I'll tell you what, you write her a note, and I'll get it to her by my head man. Ask her to meet you to say goodbye. She won't refuse that. In the meantime, we can be moving camp a little further north all the time, and you can make arrangements with her to be all ready on a certain night. Tell her I'll meet her then while you wait for us in camp. That'll be better, for I know the country well and can cover it quicker than you. You can take care of the safari and be moving along slow toward the north, and the girl and I'll catch up to you." "But suppose she won't come?" suggested Baines. "Then make another date for a last goodbye," said Hansen, "and instead of you, I'll be there and I'll bring her along anyway. She'll have to come, and after it's all over she won't feel so bad about it. Especially after living with you for 2 months while we're making the coast." A shocked and angry protest rose to Baines's lips. But he did not utter it, for almost simultaneously came the realization that this was practically the same thing he had been planning upon himself. It had sounded brutal and criminal from the lips of the rough trader, but nevertheless the young Englishman saw that with Hansen's help and his knowledge of African travel, the possibilities of success would be much greater than as though the Honorable Morrison were to attempt the thing single-handed, and so he nodded a glum assent. The balance of the long ride to Hansen's northerly camp was made in silence, for both men were occupied with their own thoughts, most of which were far from being either complimentary or loyal to the other. As they rode through the wood, the sounds of their careless passage came to the ears of another jungle wayfarer. The killer had determined to come back to the place where he had seen the white girl who took to the trees with the ability of long habitude. There was a compelling something in the recollection of her that drew him irresistibly toward her. He wished to see her by the light of day, to see her features, to see the color of her eyes and hair. It seemed to him that she must bear a strong resemblance to his lost Miriam, and yet he knew that the chances were that she did not. The fleeting glimpse that he had had of her in the moonlight as she swung from the back of her plunging pony into the branches of the tree above her had shown him a girl of about the same height as his Miriam, but of a more rounded and developed femininity. Now he was moving lazily back in the direction of the spot where he had seen the girl when the sounds of the approaching horseman came to his sharp ears. He moved stealthily through the branches until he came within sight of the riders. The younger man he instantly recognized as the same he had seen with his arms about the girl in the moonlit glade just the instant before Numa charged. The other he did not recognize, though there was a familiarity about his carriage and figure that puzzled Korak. The ape-man decided that to find the girl again he would but have to keep in touch with the young Englishman, and so he fell in behind the pair, following them to Hansen's camp. Here the Honorable Morrison penned a brief note, which Hansen gave into the keeping of one of his boys, who started off forthwith toward the south. Korak remained in the vicinity of the camp, keeping a careful watch upon the Englishman. He had half expected to find the girl at the destination of the 2 riders, and had been disappointed when no sign of her materialized about the camp. Baines was restless, pacing back and forth beneath the trees when he should have been resting against the forced marches of the coming flight. Hansen lay in his hammock and smoked. They spoke but little. Korak lay stretched upon a branch among the dense foliage above them. Thus passed the balance of the afternoon. Korak became hungry and thirsty. He doubted that either of the men would leave camp now before morning, so he withdrew, but toward the south, for there, it seemed most likely, the girl still was. In the garden beside the bungalow, Miriam wandered thoughtfully in the moonlight. She still smarted from Juana's, to her, unjust treatment of the Honorable Morrison Baines. Nothing had been explained to her. for both Bwana and my dear had wished to spare her the mortification and sorrow of the true explanation of Baines's proposal. They knew, as Miriam did not, that the man had no intention of marrying her, else he would have come directly to Bwana, knowing full well that no objection would be interposed if Miriam really cared for him. Miriam loved them both and was grateful to them for all that they had done for her. But deep in her little heart surged the savage love of liberty that her years of untrammeled freedom in the jungle had made part and parcel of her being. Now, for the first time since she had come to them, Miriam felt like a prisoner in the bungalow of Bwana and my dear. Like a caged tigress, the girl paced the length of the enclosure. Once she paused near the outer fence, her head upon one side, listening. What was it she had heard? The pad of naked human feet just beyond the garden. She listened for a moment. The sound was not repeated. Then she resumed her restless walking. Down to the opposite end of the garden she passed, turned and retraced her steps toward the upper end. Upon the sward near the bushes that hid the fence, full in the glare of the moonlight, lay a white envelope that had not been there when she had turned almost upon the very spot a moment before. Miriam stopped short in her tracks, listening again and sniffing, more than ever the tigress. Alert, ready. Beyond the bushes, a naked black runner squatted, peering through the foliage. He saw her take a step closer to the letter. She had seen it. He rose quietly, and following the shadows of the bushes that ran down to the corral, was soon gone from sight. Miriam's trained ears heard his every move. She made no attempt to seek closer knowledge of his identity. Already she had guessed that he was a messenger from the Honorable Morrison. She stooped and picked up the envelope. Tearing it open, she easily read the contents by the moon's brilliant light. It was, as she had guessed, from Baines. "I cannot go without seeing you again," it read. "Come to the clearing early tomorrow morning and say good-bye to me. Come alone." There was a little more. Words that made her heart beat faster and a happy flush mount her cheek. Chapter 20. It was still dark when the Honorable Morrison Baines set forth for the trysting place. He insisted upon having a guide, saying that he was not sure that he could find his way back to the little clearing. As a matter of fact, the thought of that lonely ride through the darkness before the sun rose had been too much for his courage, and he craved company. A black, therefore, preceded him on foot. Behind and above him came Korak, whom the noise in the camp had awakened. It was 9 o'clock before Baines drew rein in the clearing. Miriam had not yet arrived. The black lay down to rest. Baines lolled in his saddle. Korak stretched himself comfortably upon a lofty limb where he could watch those beneath him without being seen. An hour passed. Baines gave evidence of nervousness. Korak had already guessed that the young Englishman had come here to meet another, nor was he at all in doubt as to the identity of that other. The killer was perfectly satisfied that he was soon again to see the nimble she who had so forcefully reminded him of Miriam. Presently the sound of an approaching horse came to Korak's ears. She was coming. She had almost reached the clearing before Baines became aware of her presence, and then, as he looked up, the foliage parted to the head and shoulders of her mount and Miriam rode into view. Baines spurred to meet her. Korak looked searchingly down upon her, mentally anathematizing the broad-brimmed hat that hid her features from his eyes. She was abreast the Englishman now. Korak saw the man take both her hands and draw her close to his breast. He saw the man's face concealed for a moment beneath the same broad brim that hid the girl's. He could imagine their lips meeting, and a twinge of sorrow and sweet recollection combined to close his eyes for an instant in that involuntary muscular act with which we attempt to shut out from the mind's eye harrowing reflections. When he looked again, they had drawn apart and were conversing earnestly. Korak could see the man urging something. It was equally evident that the girl was holding back. There were many of her gestures, and the way in which she tossed her head up and to the right, tip-tilting her chin, that reminded Korak still more strongly of Miriam. And then the conversation was over, and the man took the girl in his arms again to kiss her goodbye. She turned and rode toward the point from which she had come. The man sat on his horse watching her. At the edge of the jungle, she turned to wave him a final farewell. "Tonight!" she cried, throwing back her head as she called the words to him across the little distance which separated them, throwing back her head and revealing her face for the first time to the eyes of the killer in the tree above. Korak started as though pierced through the heart with an arrow. He trembled and shook like a leaf. He closed his eyes, pressing his palms across them, and then he opened them again and looked. But the girl was gone. Only the waving foliage of the jungle's rim marked where she had disappeared. It was impossible. It could not be true. And yet, with his own eyes, he had seen his Miriam. Older a little, with figure more rounded by nearer maturity, and subtly changed in other ways, more beautiful than ever, yet still his little Miriam. Yes, he had seen the dead alive again. He had seen his Miriam in the flesh. She lived. She had not died. He had seen her. He had seen his Miriam in the arms of another man, and that man sat below him now, within easy reach. Korak, the killer, fondled his heavy spear. He played with the grass rope dangling from his gi-string. He stroked the hunting knife at his hip, and the man beneath him called to his drowsy guide, bent the rein to his pony's neck, and moved off toward the north. Still sat Korak, the killer, alone among the trees. Now his hands hung idly at his sides. His weapons and what he had intended were forgotten for the moment. Korak was thinking. He had noted that subtle change in Miriam. When last he had seen her, she had been his little, half-naked Mangani, wild, savage, and uncouth. She had not seemed uncouth to him then. But now, in the change that had come over her, he knew that such she had been, yet no more uncouth than he, and he was still uncouth. In her had taken place the change. In her he had just seen a sweet and lovely flower of refinement and civilization, and he shuddered as he recalled the fate that he himself had planned for her. To be the mate of an ape-man, his mate, in the savage jungle. Then he had seen no wrong in it, for he had loved her, and the way he had planned had been the way of the jungle which they two had chosen as their home. But now, after having seen the Miriam of civilized attire, he realized the hideousness of his once-cherished plan, and he thanked God that chance and the blacks of Kovudu had thwarted him. Yet he still loved her, and jealousy seared his soul as he recalled the sight of her in the arms of the dapper young Englishman. What were his intentions toward her? Did he really love her? How could one not love her? And she loved him. Of that Korak had had ample proof. Had she not loved him, she would not have accepted his kisses. His Miriam loved another. For a long time he let that awful truth sink deep, and from it he tried to reason out his future plan of action. In his heart was a great desire to follow the man and slay him, but ever there rose in his consciousness the thought, she loves him. Could he slay the creature Miriam loved? Sadly he shook his head. No, he could not. Then came a partial decision to follow Miriam and speak with her. He half started, and then glanced down at his nakedness and was ashamed. He, the son of a British peer, had thus thrown away his life, had thus degraded himself to the level of a beast, that he was ashamed to go to the woman he loved and lay his love at her feet. He was ashamed to go to the little Arab maid who had been his jungle playmate, for what had he to offer her? For years, circumstances had prevented a return to his father and mother, and at last, pride had stepped in and expunged from his mind the last vestige of any intention to return. In a spirit of boyish adventure, he had cast his lot with the jungle ape. The killing of the crook in the coast inn had filled his childish mind with terror of the law and driven him deeper into the wilds. The rebuffs that he had met at the hands of men, both black and white, had had their effect upon his mind, while yet it was in a formative state and easily influenced. He had come to believe that the hand of man was against him, and then he had found in Miriam the only human association he required or craved. When she had been snatched from him, his sorrow had been so deep that the thought of ever mingling again with human beings grew still more unutterably distasteful. Finally, and for all time, he thought, the die was cast. Of his own volition he had become a beast he had lived, a beast he would die. Now that it was too late, he regretted it. For now, Miriam, still living, had been revealed to him in a guise of progress and advancement that had carried her completely out of his life. Death itself could not have further removed her from him. In her new world she loved a man of her own kind, and Korak knew that it was right. She was not for him, not for the naked, savage ape. No, she was not for him, but he still was hers. If he could not have her and happiness, he would at least do all that lay in his power to assure happiness to her. He would follow the young Englishman. In the first place, he would know that he meant Miriam no harm, and after that, though jealousy wrenched his heart, he would watch over the man Miriam loved, for Miriam's sake. But God help that man if he thought to wrong her. Slowly, he aroused himself. He stood erect and stretched his great frame, the muscles of his arms gliding sinuously beneath his tanned skin as he bent his clenched fists behind his head. A movement on the ground beneath caught his eye. An antelope was entering the clearing. Immediately, Korak became aware that he was empty. Again, he was a beast. For a moment, love had lifted him to sublime heights of honor and renunciation. The antelope was crossing the clearing. Korak dropped to the ground upon the opposite side of the tree, and so lightly that not even the sensitive ears of the antelope apprehended his presence. He uncoiled his grass rope. It was the latest addition to his armament, yet he was proficient with it. Often he traveled with nothing more than his knife and his rope. They were light and easy to carry. His spear and bow and arrows were cumbersome, and he usually kept one or all of them hidden away in a private cache. Now he held a single coil of the long rope in his right hand and the balance in his left. The antelope was but a few paces from him. Silently, Korak leaped from his hiding place, swinging the rope free from the entangling shrubbery. The antelope sprang away almost instantly, but instantly, too, the coiled rope, with its sliding noose, flew through the air above him. With unerring precision, it settled about the creature's neck. There was a quick wrist movement of the thrower. The noose tightened. The killer braced himself with the rope across his hip, and as the antelope tautened the singing strands in a last frantic bound for liberty, he was thrown over upon his back. Then, instead of approaching the fallen animal as a roper of the western plains might do, Korak dragged his captive to himself, pulling him in hand over hand, and when he was within reach, leaping upon him even as Sheeta the panther might have done, and burying his teeth in the animal's neck while he found its heart with the point of his hunting knife. Recoiling his rope, he cut a few generous strips from his kill and took to the trees again, where he ate in peace. Later, he swung off in the direction of a nearby waterhole, and then he slept. In his mind, of course, was the suggestion of another meeting between Miriam and the young Englishman that had been borne to him by the girl's parting. Tonight, he had not followed Miriam because he knew from the direction from which she had come, and in which she returned, that wheresoever she had found an asylum, it lay out across the plains, and not wishing to be discovered by the girl, he had not cared to venture into the open after her. It would do as well to keep in touch with the young man, and that was precisely what he intended doing. To you or me, the possibility of locating the Honorable Morrison in the jungle, after having permitted him to get such a considerable start, might have seemed remote, but to Korak it was not at all. He guessed that the white man would return to his camp, but should he have done otherwise, it would be a simple matter to the killer to trail a mounted man accompanied by another on foot. Days might pass, and still such a spoor would be sufficiently plain to lead Korak unfalteringly to its end. while a matter of a few hours only left it as clear to him as though the makers themselves were still in plain sight. And so it came that a few minutes after the Honorable Morrison Baines entered the camp to be greeted by Hansen, Korak slipped noiselessly into a nearby tree. There he lay until late afternoon, and still the young Englishman made no move to leave camp. Korak wondered if Miriam were coming there. A little later, Hansen and one of his black boys rode out of camp. Korak merely noted the fact. He was not particularly interested in what any other member of the company than the young Englishman did. Darkness came, and still the young man remained. He ate his evening meal, afterward smoking numerous cigarettes. Presently he began to pace back and forth before his tent. He kept his boy busy replenishing the fire. A lion coughed, and he went into his tent to reappear with an express rifle. Again he admonished the boy to throw more brush upon the fire. Korak saw that he was nervous and afraid, and his lip curled in a sneer of contempt. Was this the creature who had supplanted him in the heart of his Miriam? Was this a man who trembled when Numa coughed? How could such as he protect Miriam from the countless dangers of the jungle? Ah, but he would not have to. They would live in the safety of European civilization, where men in uniforms were hired to protect them. What need had a European of prowess to protect his mate? Again the sneer curled Korak's lip. Hansen and his boy had ridden directly to the clearing. It was already dark when they arrived. Leaving the boy there, Hansen rode to the edge of the plain, leading the boy's horse. There he waited. It was 9 o'clock before he saw a solitary figure galloping toward him from the direction of the bungalow. A few moments later, Miriam drew in her mount beside him. She was nervous and flushed. When she recognized Hansen, she drew back, startled. Mr. Baines's horse fell on him and sprained his ankle. Hansen hastened to explain. He couldn't very well come, so he sent me to meet you and bring you to camp. The girl could not see in the darkness the gloating, triumphant expression on the speaker's face. "We had better hurry," continued Hansen, "for we'll have to move along pretty fast if we don't want to be overtaken." "Is he hurt badly?" asked Miriam. "Only a little sprain," replied Hansen. "He can ride all right, but we both thought he'd better lie up tonight and rest, for he'll have plenty hard riding in the next few weeks." "Yes," agreed the girl. Hansen swung his pony about, and Miriam followed him. They rode north along the edge of the jungle for a mile, and then turned straight into it toward the west. Miriam, following, paid little attention to directions. She did not know exactly where Hansen's camp lay, and so she did not guess that he was not leading her toward it. All night they rode, straight toward the west. When morning came, Hansen permitted a short halt for breakfast, which he had provided in well-filled saddlebags before leaving his camp. Then they pushed on again, nor did they halt a second time until, in the heat of the day, he stopped and motioned the girl to dismount. "We will sleep here for a time and let the ponies graze," he said. "I had no idea the camp was so far away," said Miriam. "I left orders that they were to move on at daybreak," explained the trader, "so that we could get a good start. I knew that you and I could easily overtake a laden safari. It may not be until tomorrow that we'll catch up with them." But though they traveled part of the night and all the following day, no sign of the safari appeared ahead of them. Miriam, an adept in jungle craft, knew that none had passed ahead of them for many days. Occasionally she saw indications of an old spoor, a very old spoor, of many men. For the most part, they followed this well-marked trail along elephant paths and through park-like groves. It was an ideal trail for rapid traveling. Miriam at last became suspicious. Gradually the attitude of the man at her side had begun to change. Often she surprised him devouring her with his eyes. Steadily the former sensation of previous acquaintanceship urged itself upon her. Somewhere, some time before she had known this man. It was evident that he had not shaved for several days. A blonde stubble had commenced to cover his neck and cheeks and chin, and with it the assurance that he was no stranger continued to grow upon the girl. It was not until the second day, however, that Miriam rebelled. She drew in her pony at last and voiced her doubts. Hansen assured her that the camp was but a few miles further on. "We should have overtaken them yesterday," he said. "They must have marched much faster than I had believed possible." "They have not marched here at all," said Miriam. "The spoor that we have been following is weeks old." Hansen laughed. "Oh, that's it, is it?" he cried. "Why didn't you say so before? I could have easily explained. We are not coming by the same route, but we'll pick up their trail sometime today, even if we don't overtake them." Now, at last, Miriam knew the man was lying to her. What a fool he must be to think that anyone could believe such a ridiculous explanation. Who was so stupid as to believe that they could have expected to overtake another party, and he had certainly assured her that momentarily he expected to do so, when that party's route was not to meet theirs for several miles yet. She kept her own counsel, however, planning to escape at the first opportunity when she might have a sufficient start of her captor, as she now considered him, to give her some assurance of outdistancing him. She watched his face continually when she could without being observed. Tantalizingly, the placing of his familiar features persisted in eluding her. Where had she known him? Under what conditions had they met before she had seen him about the farm of Bwana? She ran over in her mind all the few white men she ever had known. There were some who had come to her father's douar in the jungle. Few, it is true, but there had been some. Ah, now she had it. She had seen him there. She almost seized upon his identity, and then, in an instant, it had slipped from her again. It was mid-afternoon when they suddenly broke out of the jungle upon the banks of a broad and placid river. Beyond, upon the opposite shore, Miriam described a camp surrounded by a high thorn boma. "Here we are at last," said Hansen. He drew his revolver and fired in the air. Instantly the camp across the river was astir. Black men ran down the river's bank. Hansen hailed them. But there was no sign of the Honorable Morrison Baines. In accordance with their master's instructions, the blacks manned a canoe and rowed across. Hansen placed Miriam in the little craft and entered it himself, leaving two boys to watch the horses, which the canoe was to return for, and swim across to the campside of the river. Once in the camp, Miriam asked for Baines. For the moment her fears had been allayed by the sight of the camp, which she had come to look upon as more or less a myth. Hansen pointed toward the single tent that stood in the center of the enclosure. "There," he said, and preceded her toward it. At the entrance he held the flap aside and motioned her within. Miriam entered and looked about. The tent was empty. She turned toward Hansen. There was a broad grin on his face. "Where is Mr. Baines?" she demanded. "He ain't here," replied Hansen. "Leastwise I don't see him, do you? But I'm here, and I'm a damn sight better man than that thing ever was. You don't need him no more. You got me." And he laughed uproariously and reached for her. Miriam struggled to free herself. Hansen encircled her arms and body in his powerful grip and bore her slowly backward toward the pile of blankets at the far end of the tent. His face was bent close to hers. His eyes were narrowed to two slits of heat and passion and desire. Miriam was looking full into his face as she fought for freedom when there came over her a sudden recollection of a similar scene in which she had been a participant, and with it full recognition of her assailant. He was the Swede Malbine, who had attacked her once before, who had shot his companion who would have saved her, and from whom she had been rescued by Bwana. His smooth face had deceived her, but now, with the growing beard and the similarity of conditions, recognition came swift and sure. But today there would be no Bwana to save her. Chapter 21. The black boy whom Malbine had left awaiting him in the clearing with instructions to remain until he returned sat crouched at the foot of a tree for an hour when he was suddenly startled by the coughing grunt of a lion behind him. With celerity born of the fear of death, the boy clambered into the branches of the tree, and a moment later the king of beasts entered the clearing and approached the carcass of an antelope which, until now, the boy had not seen. Until daylight, the beast fed, while the black clung, sleepless, to his perch, wondering what had become of his master and the 2 ponies. He had been with Malbine for a year, and so was fairly conversant with the character of the white. His knowledge presently led him to believe that he had been purposely abandoned. Like the balance of Malbine's followers, this boy hated his master cordially, fear being the only bond that held him to the white man. His present uncomfortable predicament but added fuel to the fires of his hatred. As the sun rose, the lion withdrew into the jungle, and the black descended from his tree and started upon his long journey back to camp. In his primitive brain revolved various fiendish plans for a revenge that he would not have the courage to put into effect when the test came and he stood face to face with one of the dominant race. A mile from the clearing, he came upon the spoor of 2 ponies crossing his path at right angles. A cunning look entered the black's eyes. He laughed uproariously and slapped his thighs. Negroes are tireless gossipers, which, of course, is but a roundabout way of saying that they are human. Malbine's boys had been no exception to the rule, and as many of them had been with him at various times during the past 10 years, there was little about his acts and life in the African wilds that was not known directly or by hearsay to them all. And so, knowing his master and many of his past deeds, knowing, too, a great deal about the plans of Malbine and Baines that had been overheard by himself or other servants, and knowing well from the gossip of the head men that half of Malbine's party lay in camp by the great river far to the west, it was not difficult for the boy to put 2 and 2 together and arrive at 4 as the sum. The 4 being represented by a firm conviction that his master had deceived the other white man and taken the latter's woman to his western camp, leaving the other to suffer capture and punishment at the hands of the big Bwana whom all feared. Again the boy bared his rows of big white teeth and laughed aloud. Then he resumed his northward way, traveling at a dogged trot that ate up the miles with marvelous rapidity. In the Swedes' camp, the Honorable Morrison had spent an almost sleepless night of nervous apprehension and doubts and fears. Toward morning he had slept, utterly exhausted. It was the headman who awoke him shortly after sunrise to remind him that they must at once take up their northward journey. Baines hung back. He wanted to wait for Hansen and Miriam. The headman urged upon him the danger that lay in loitering. The fellow knew his master's plans sufficiently well to understand that he had done something to arouse the ire of the big Bwana, and that it would fare ill with them all if they were overtaken in big Bwana's country. At the suggestion, Baines took alarm. What if the big Bwana, as the headman called him, had surprised Hansen in his nefarious work? Would he not guess the truth and possibly be already on the march to overtake and punish him? Baines had heard much of his host's summary method of dealing out punishment to malefactors great and small who transgressed the laws or customs of his savage little world, which lay beyond the outer ramparts of what men are pleased to call frontiers. In this savage world where there was no law, the big Bwana was law unto himself and all who dwelt about him. It was even rumored that he had extracted the death penalty from a white man who had maltreated a native girl. Baines shuddered at the recollection of this piece of gossip as he wondered what his host would exact of the man who had attempted to steal his young, white ward. The thought brought him to his feet. "Yes," he said nervously, "we must get away from here at once. Do you know the trail to the north?" The head man did, and he lost no time in getting the safari upon the march. It was noon when a tired and sweat-covered runner overtook the trudging little column. The man was greeted with shouts of welcome from his fellows, to whom he imparted all that he knew and guessed of the actions of their master, so that the entire safari was aware of matters before Baines, who marched close to the head of the column, was reached and acquainted with the facts and the imaginings of the black boy whom Malbine had deserted in the clearing the night before. When the Honorable Morrison had listened to all that the boy had to say and realized that the traitor had used him as a tool whereby he himself might get Miriam into his possession. His blood ran hot with rage, and he trembled with apprehension for the girl's safety. That another contemplated no worse a deed than he had contemplated in no way palliated the hideousness of the other's offense. At first it did not occur to him that he would have wronged Miriam no less than he believed Hansen contemplated wronging her. Now his rage was more the rage of a man beaten at his own game and robbed of the prize that he had thought already his. "Do you know where your master has gone?" he asked the black. "Yes, Bwana," replied the boy. "He has gone to the other camp beside the big Affy that flows far toward the setting sun." "Can you take me to him?" demanded Baines. The boy nodded affirmatively. Here he saw a method of revenging himself upon his hated Bwana, and at the same time of escaping the wrath of the big Bwana, whom all were positive would first follow after the northerly safari. "Can you and I, alone, reach his camp?" asked the Honorable Morrison. "Yes, Bwana," assured the black. Baines turned toward the head man. He was conversant with Hansen's plans now. He understood why he had wished to move the northern camp as far as possible toward the northern boundary of the Big Bwana's country. It would give him far more time to make his escape toward the west coast while the Big Bwana was chasing the northern contingent. Well, he would utilize the man's plans to his own end. He, too, must keep out of the clutches of his host. "You may take the men north as fast as possible," he said to the headman. "I shall return and attempt to lead the Big Bwana to the west." The Negro assented with a grunt. He had no desire to follow this strange white man who was afraid at night. He had less to remain at the tender mercies of the Big Bwana's lusty warriors, between whom and his people there was long-standing blood feud, and he was more than delighted, into the bargain, for a legitimate excuse for deserting his much-hated Swede master. He knew a way to the north and his own country that the white men did not know. A short cut across an arid plateau where lay water-holes of which the white hunters and explorers that had passed from time to time the fringe of the dry country had never dreamed. He might even elude the Big Bwana should he follow them, and with this thought uppermost in his mind, he gathered the remnants of Malbine's safari into a semblance of order and moved off toward the north. And toward the southwest, the black boy led the Honorable Morrison Baines into the jungles. Korak had waited about the camp, watching the Honorable Morrison until the safari had started north. Then, assured that the young Englishman was going in the wrong direction to meet Miriam, he had abandoned him and returned slowly to the point where he had seen the girl, for whom his heart yearned, in the arms of another. So great had been his happiness at seeing Miriam alive that, for the instant, no thought of jealousy had entered his mind. Later these thoughts had come, dark, bloody thoughts that would have made the flesh of the honorable. Morrison Creep, could he have guessed that they were revolving in the brain of a savage creature creeping stealthily among the branches of the forest giant beneath which he waited the coming of Hansen and the girl? And with passing of the hours had come subdued reflection in which he had weighed himself against the trimly clad English gentleman and found that he was wanting. What had he to offer her by comparison with that which the other man might offer? What was his mess of pottage to the birthright that the other had preserved? How could he dare go, naked and unkempt, to that fair thing who had once been his jungle fellow, and propose the thing that had been in his mind when first the realization of his love had swept over him? He shuddered as he thought of the irreparable wrong that his love would have done the innocent child but for the chance that had snatched her from him before it was too late. Doubtless she knew now the horror that had been in his mind. Doubtless she hated and loathed him as he hated and loathed himself when he let his mind dwell upon it. He had lost her. no more. Surely had she been lost when he thought her dead than she was in reality now that he had seen her living in the guise of a refinement that had transfigured and sanctified her. He had loved her before, now he worshipped her. He knew that he might never possess her now, but at least he might see her. From a distance he might look upon her. Perhaps he might serve her, but never must she guess that he had found her or that he lived. He wondered if she ever thought of him, if the happy days that they had spent together never recurred to her mind. It seemed unbelievable that such could be the case, and yet, too, it seemed almost equally unbelievable that this beautiful girl was the same disheveled, half-naked, little sprite who skipped nimbly among the branches of the trees as they ran and played in the lazy, happy days of the past. It could not be that her memory held more of the past than did her new appearance. It was a sad Korak who ranged the jungle near the plain's edge, waiting for the coming of his Miriam, the Miriam who never came. But there came another, a tall, broad-shouldered man in khaki at the head of a swarthy crew of ebon warriors. The man's face was set in hard, stern lines, and the marks of sorrow were writ deep about his mouth and eyes, so deep that the set expression of rage upon his features could not obliterate them. Korak saw the man pass beneath him where he hid in the great tree that had harbored him before upon the edge of that fateful little clearing. He saw him come, and he sat rigid and frozen and suffering above him. He saw him search the ground with his keen eyes, and he only sat there watching, with eyes that glazed from the intensity of his gaze. He saw him sign to his men that he had come upon that which he sought, and he saw him pass out of sight toward the north, and still Korak sat like a graven image, with a heart that bled in dumb misery. An hour later, Korak moved slowly away, back into the jungle toward the west. He went listlessly, with bent head and stooped shoulders, like an old man who bore upon his back the weight of a great sorrow. Baines, following his black guide, battled his way through the dense underbrush, riding stooped low over his horse's neck, or often he dismounted where the low branches swept too close to earth to permit him to remain in the saddle. The black was taking him the shortest way, which was no way at all for a horseman, and after the first day's march, the young Englishman was forced to abandon his mount and follow his nimble guide entirely on foot. During the long hours of marching, the Honorable Morrison had much time to devote to thought, and as he pictured the probable fate of Miriam at the hands of the Swede, his rage against the man became the greater. But presently there came to him a realization of the fact that his own base plans had led the girl into this terrible predicament, and that even had she escaped Hansen, she would have found but little better deserts awaiting her with him. There came, too, the realization that Miriam was infinitely more precious to him than he had imagined. For the first time he commenced to compare her with other women of his acquaintance, women of birth and position, and almost to his surprise, he discovered that the young Arab girl suffered less than they by the comparison, and then from hating Hansen he came to look upon himself with hate and loathing, to see himself and his perfidious act in all their contemptible hideousness. Thus, in the crucible of shame amidst the white heat of naked truths, the passion that the man had felt for the girl he had considered his social inferior was transmuted into love. And as he staggered on, there burned within him, beside his new-born love, another great passion, the passion of hate urging him on to the consummation of revenge. A creature of ease and luxury, he had never been subjected to the hardships and tortures which now were his constant companionship, yet, his clothing torn, his flesh scratched and bleeding, he urged the black to greater speed, though with every dozen steps he himself fell from exhaustion. It was revenge which kept him going. That and a feeling that in his suffering he was partially expiating the great wrong he had done the girl he loved, for hope of saving her from the fate into which he had trapped her had never existed. Too late was the dismal accompaniment of thought to which he marched. Too late too late to save, but not too late to avenge. That kept him up. Only when it became too dark to see would he permit of a halt. A dozen times in the afternoon he had threatened the black with instant death when the tired guide insisted upon resting. The fellow was terrified. He could not understand the remarkable change that had so suddenly come over the white man who had been afraid in the dark the night before. He would have deserted this terrifying master had he had the opportunity, but Baines guessed that some such thought might be in the other's mind, and so gave the fellow none. He kept close to him by day, and slept touching him at night, in the rude thorn boma they constructed as a slight protection against prowling carnivora. That the Honorable Morrison could sleep at all in the midst of the savage jungle was sufficient indication that he had changed considerably in the past 24 hours, and that he could lie close beside a none too fragrant black man spoke of possibilities for democracy within him, yet all undreamed of. Morning found him stiff and lame and sore, but nonetheless determined to push on in pursuit of Hansen as rapidly as possible. With his rifle he brought down a buck at a ford in a small stream shortly after they broke camp, breakfastless. Begrudgingly he permitted a halt while they cooked and ate, and then on again through the wilderness of trees and vines and underbrush. And in the meantime Korak wandered slowly westward, coming upon the trail of Tantor, the elephant, whom he overtook browsing in the deep shade of the jungle. The ape-man, lonely and sorrowing, was glad of the companionship of his huge friend. Affectionately the sinuous trunk encircled him, and he was swung to the mighty back, where so often before he had lolled and dreamed the long afternoon away. Far to the north, the big Bwana and his black warriors clung tenaciously to the trail of the fleeing safari that was luring them further and further from the girl they sought to save. While back at the bungalow, the woman who had loved Miriam as though she had been her own waited impatiently and in sorrow for the return of the rescuing party, and the girl she was positive her invincible lord and master would bring back with him.